Dear friends, subscribe and hit the bell. Your support allows us to continue our investigations. A thick, impenetrable fog enveloped the Somme River Valley early on the morning of March 21st, 1918. The silence hanging over the shell-pocked land of northern France seemed unnatural, almost palpable. In the trenches of the British 3rd and 5th Armies, sentries peered into the milky white, trying to discern any movement, but saw only the ghostly outlines of barbed wire. Soldiers, accustomed to constant thunder for 4 years, felt a strange uneasiness. This was not the calm of peace, but the bated breath of a predator before a leap. Somewhere there, just a few hundred meters away, beyond the veil of fog, a million-strong mass of people in gray uniforms stood frozen, awaiting a signal. At 4:40 in the morning, the horizon suddenly fractured. The sky turned into a solid canvas of fire. 6,600 German cannons and 3,500 mortars simultaneously opened fire. This was unlike anything the world had seen before. The earth trembled so violently that the vibrations were felt even in London. A hurricane of steel and explosives rained down on the Allied front lines, command posts, and artillery batteries. The air instantly filled with the acrid smell of cordite and the sweetish, nauseating aroma of mustard gas. Thus began the operation that was to decide the outcome of the greatest conflict in human history. A battle in which not just armies clashed, but entire civilizational orders. To understand the scale of this catastrophe and the grandeur of the triumph that followed, it is necessary to rewind time a little and look at the map of Europe of that period. By the beginning of 1918, the situation had reached a strategic stalemate. The Western Front had turned into a giant scar on the body of France, stretching from the Swiss border to the North Sea. The trench lines, fortified with concrete and machine gun nests, seemed impregnable. Any attempt at a breakthrough resulted in colossal losses of manpower for a negligible advance of a couple of kilometers. However, the balance of power was relentlessly changing. In the east, the Russian Empire, engulfed in revolutionary chaos, withdrew from the war, signing a peace treaty. This event became a key catalyst. The German command was able to transfer almost 50 divisions from the Eastern Front to the Western. For the first time in the entire war, Germany gained numerical superiority on the decisive theater of military operations. But this superiority was temporary. Across the ocean, the giant industrial machine of the United States of America had already gained momentum. American troops began to arrive in France, and their flow intensified with each passing month. The German General Staff, led by Erich Ludendorff, perfectly understood the language of numbers. Time was working against Berlin. The economic blockade was strangling the country, resources were dwindling, and the population was teetering on the brink of starvation. Germany had only one chance: to deliver a crushing blow now, in the spring, to defeat the British and French before the American army became a real fighting force. This was an all-in bet, a desperate roll of the dice where the very existence of the empire was at stake. The task was monumental: to break through the front, cut off the Allies, pin the British army against the sea, and force France to capitulate. The very nature of the war by this point had undergone fundamental changes. The old tactics, where waves of infantry advanced under artillery cover to capture the first line of trenches, no longer worked. It was too slow and predictable. Defense had become deeply echeloned, stretched for kilometers in depth. To break such a defense required a new approach, a new philosophy of combat. It was here, on the fields of northern France, that modern military art was born. the Germans placed their bets on assault group tactics. Instead of broad chains, small, well-armed detachments, trained to act autonomously, went into battle. Their task was not to capture every strong point, but to infiltrate between them, seek out weak spots, bypass resistance nodes, and rush into the rear, sowing panic and chaos. Artillery no longer destroyed trenches for weeks. It struck with a short but incredibly powerful barrage, suppressing command and communication. This was the prototype of what, 2 decades later, would be called blitzkrieg. When the infantry went on the attack on March 21st, the effect exceeded all expectations. The thick fog, which so frightened the British sentries, became the best ally of the attackers. It concealed the movement of the assault groups, allowing them to get close to machine gun nests. The British defense, which seemed monolithic, crumbled in a few hours. Communication was cut off, commanders lost control of their units, entire battalions found themselves surrounded without having fired a single shot. The British Fifth Army was practically destroyed as an organized force. The front, which had stood still for years, came into motion. German troops advanced with frightening speed, covering 20 and sometimes 40 kilometers. It seemed the road to Paris was open. Evacuation began in the French capital, and long-range guns, the famous Paris guns, began shelling the city, creating an atmosphere of apocalypse. However, beneath this outward success lay a deep internal conflict, tearing the German army apart. Tactical genius clashed with strategic blindness. Soldiers who had broken through into British rear areas saw something that shocked them more than the enemy's resistance. They saw warehouses crammed with provisions, clothing, canned goods, cigarettes, and alcohol. For people who had lived for years on ersatz products and turnip soup, this was a shock. They realized that propaganda had lied to them about the enemy also starving and being exhausted. Discipline began to crumble. Advancing units stopped not because of enemy fire, but to loot captured warehouses and eat their fill. The hungry belly overcame military duty. Furthermore, German logistics, designed for trench warfare, could not keep up with the rapid advance. Artillery lagged behind, ammunition was not delivered on time, and exhausted horses collapsed from exhaustion. On the other side of the front, its own drama unfolded. British Field Marshal Douglas Haig, a man often accused of lacking imagination and indifference to casualties, found himself in a critical situation. He understood that if the French did not send reinforcements, the British Expeditionary Force would be pushed into the English Channel. Relations between the Allies were strained to the breaking point. Each general sought to save his own army. French Commander-in-Chief Pétain was prepared to retreat to Paris to cover the capital, even if it meant breaking contact with the British. At this moment, the true nature of coalition warfare became apparent. Without a unified command, defeat was inevitable. Only in the face of complete catastrophe were political leaders able to overcome national pride. The historic decision was made to appoint Ferdinand Foch as Supreme Commander of the Allied forces. This step, taken at the moment of deepest crisis, became the foundation of future victory. I will fight in front of Amiens. I will fight in Amiens. I will fight behind Amiens, declared Foch, embodying an unyielding will to resist. The conflict of ideas here was no less important than the conflict of armies. Two concepts of warfare clashed. On one side, the German school, based on the individual skill of the soldier, tactical flexibility, and a reliance on a decisive battle that would end everything in one blow. On the other side, the Allied approach, relying on material superiority, technology, and the inexhaustible resources of global empires. This was the clash of a qualitative army of the past with the quantitative and technological might of the future. The Germans relied on people, the Allies on machines. And in this confrontation, machines were beginning to gain the upper hand. The German offensive, despite impressive territorial gains, began to run out of steam. They seized vast expanses of devastated, crater-ridden land, which they themselves had destroyed during their retreat a year earlier. This territory had no strategic value but required enormous forces to hold. Stretched flanks became vulnerable, and the best assault units, the elite of the army, suffered irreplaceable losses. In midsummer 1918, a turning point arrived. The Second Battle of the Marne finally halted the German offensive. The initiative passed into the hands of the Allies. But this was not just a return to the old strategy. The Allies had learned from their mistakes. They learned to coordinate the actions of infantry, artillery, aviation, and, most importantly, tanks. The tank, this clumsy, often breaking down but formidable invention, became a symbol of a new era. If, at the beginning of the war, cavalry still tried to play a role in maneuvers, now steel monsters dictated the terms on the battlefield. On August 8, 1918, the Battle of Amiens began. This day went down in history as the Black Day of the German Army. That morning, fog again played its role, but now it was on the side of the Allies. Hundreds of tanks, accompanied by infantry and supported by an artillery barrage, moved forward. Unlike the Germans, the Allies did not need to spend days on preliminary artillery preparation, which gave away the attack's location. The tanks simply crushed wire and suppressed machine gun nests with their fire and mass. The German defense collapsed. But the most terrifying thing for the German command was not the loss of kilometers of territory, but the loss of morale. Entire divisions surrendered without offering serious resistance. Soldiers who had gone through the hell of 4 years of war were simply tired. The belief in victory that had sustained them during the spring offensive evaporated. They saw endless columns of fresh American troops, felt the overwhelming superiority of the enemy in the air, and understood the futility of further resistance. From this moment on, the war turned into a series of powerful, coordinated Allied strikes across the entire front. This was a strategy that would later be called the strategy of 1,000 cuts, or a series of consecutive offensives. As soon as the Germans redeployed reserves to close a breach in one place, a blow was struck in another. The British, French, Americans, Canadians, Australians, they all acted as a single mechanism. Air power dominated the skies. Aircraft not only conducted reconnaissance, but also stormed ground troops, bombed communications and rear areas, preventing the enemy from regrouping. This was the birth of modern combined arms operations, where success depended on the interaction of all branches of service. The culmination of this titanic struggle was the breakthrough of the Hindenburg Line, the most powerful defensive system which German propaganda had declared impregnable. In late September, in pouring rain, Allied forces approached the St. Quentin Canal. It was an engineering marvel transformed into a fortress. Deep tunnels, bunkers, rows of barbed wire tens of meters wide. It seemed that the offensive should have stalled here, but the Allies applied everything they had learned. Massive artillery fire, which lasted 56 hours, destroyed the fortifications. British and American soldiers, many of whom were in life jackets, crossed the canal. Tanks, equipped with special fascines for overcoming ditches, paved the way. When the Hindenburg Line was breached, it became clear that Germany's military defeat was a matter of time. The German army was not physically destroyed. It maintained order during the retreat, but it had lost the ability to win. The strategic backbone was broken. In Germany's rear, unrest began. Hunger, war weariness, and news from the front led to a social explosion. Sailors in Kiel rebelled, and the uprising quickly spread throughout the country. Kaiser Wilhelm II was forced to abdicate. Political events began to outpace military ones. The German command, which had recently dreamed of a parade in Paris, now begged for an armistice. On November 11, 1918, in a railway car in the Compiègne forest, an agreement on a ceasefire was signed. At 11 o'clock in the morning, silence fell. The same silence with which everything began, but now it was different. It was not the silence before the storm, but the silence of devastation and the end of an era. But what does this battle, this series of operations in northern France, mean for us today? Why do we continue to study maneuvers from 100 years ago? The answer lies not only in military tactics. The battles of 1918 became a bifurcation point for all human civilization. It was here that the old Europe of monarchies and aristocracy finally perished, giving way to an age of democracies, totalitarian regimes, and mass ideologies. The technologies tested on the fields of the Somme and the Marne defined the face of the 20th century. Tanks became the main striking force of ground troops, aviation became the key to control over space, and radio communication connected the world into a single network. But even more important were the lessons of organization. The world learned what total war was, requiring the mobilization of all national resources, from factories to the psychology of every citizen. Russia, observing these events from the sidelines, already immersed in its own civil war, absorbed these lessons with particular thoroughness. The experience of breaking through fortified lines, the use of massive artillery, and the role of mobile formations formed the basis of the future Soviet military doctrine of deep operation. What Ludendorff failed to achieve in the spring of 18 would be perfected in the 40s. Poland, reborn as an independent state on the ruins of empires, also carefully studied the experience of the French front, understanding that its security depended on its ability to maneuver and defend itself in modern warfare. The heroes of the national memory of France and England, those who endured the hell of spring and went on the offensive in summer, became a symbol of the resilience of democratic nations. However, the price of this victory was terrifying. A lost generation. Millions of young people whose lives were cut short or crippled became an eternal reminder of the fragility of peace. The paradox of this great battle is that the tactical triumph of one side and the strategic collapse of the other were separated by the thinnest of lines. In the spring of 18, it seemed that Germany was winning. In the summer, everything turned upside down. This teaches us that in complex systems, be it war or geopolitics, linear logic does not work. The accumulation of small errors, material fatigue, moral decay, and the sudden appearance of new technology can instantly change the balance of power. Victory in a modern conflict is achieved not only on the battlefield, but also in factory workshops, in logistics centers, and in the minds of people. The history of the Northern Front in 1918 is a story of humanity stepping into a technological abyss from which it emerged forever changed. We see pride and ambition shattered by the harsh reality of logistics and resources. We see individual heroism drowned in the mass of industrial destruction. Yet it is the human spirit that remains the decisive factor. When the fog lifted on November 11th, the world saw not just a battlefield littered with metal and bodies, it saw a blueprint for its future. And every time we hear about new military technologies, about geopolitical confrontations, or about the need for unity in the face of a threat, we hear the echo of those distant shots. Concluding this overview, we return to the image of that solitary sentry in the fog. He did not know that in a few hours, hell would break loose, changing the world. He was simply doing his duty. In this simple fact lies a profound truth. History is made not only by generals and politicians, but by millions of nameless people who stand at their post when the fog thickens. Their resilience, their fear, and their hope, these are the true engines of history. And as long as we remember this, as long as we are able to analyze not only the arrows on maps, but also the human cost of those arrows, we have a chance not to repeat the mistakes of the past. Though, as history shows, humanity is a student who often skips the most important lessons. The technological race that began in the trenches of Flanders and Picardy did not stop for a minute. Aviation, which took its first tentative steps over the battlefield, turned into a formidable force capable of wiping cities off the face of the earth. Tanks, initially a curiosity, evolved into sophisticated machines of destruction. Chemical weapons, though later banned, forever remained a nightmare in collective memory. But perhaps the most important legacy of those days was the understanding that war could no longer be an isolated event. It penetrates every home, touches every family, changes the economy and culture. The concept of front and rear began to blur precisely when long-range guns shelled Paris and Gotha bombers raided London. The civilian population became both hostage and participant in the conflict. A century later, the fields of northern France are green again. Craters are overgrown with grass, and former trenches have become farmlands. But the land there still holds its iron harvest: unexploded shells, shrapnel, uniform buttons, and the bones of those who never returned home. Every year, farmers' plows bring these artifacts to the surface, reminding us that the past never truly leaves. It lies right beneath our feet, ready to remind us of itself with rusty metal or the sudden echo of an explosion during demining. The monuments and memorials that dot this land, Thiepval, Vimy, the Menin Gate, are not just stones. They are a cry of warning, carved in granite. The names of thousands of missing persons etched on the walls create endless lists, taking hours to read. Behind each name is an untold story, an unfulfilled dream, a life cut short. Looking at the events of 1918 through the prism of modernity, we see striking parallels. The information war, which then played the role of propaganda, has today reached a new level. But the essence remains the same: to break the enemy's will even before active hostilities begin. Economic pressure, sanctions, and blockades. All these tools were honed precisely then. And of course, the role of technology. Artificial intelligence and drones today are the tanks and aeroplanes of that time. New, not fully understood, but inevitably game-changing factors. Those who adapt faster to changes, who can integrate the new into existing systems, will gain the advantage. Conservatism in military affairs, as the experience of the German army in the spring of 18 showed, can be fatal, but a thoughtless reliance on wonder weapons without a reliable rear will not bring victory either. Thus, the battle for northern France remains not just a chapter in a history textbook, but a living, pulsating lesson. It is a reminder that civilization is a thin shell that can be torn apart at any moment under the pressure of ambition and fear. But it is also a testament to man's incredible capacity for adaptation, ingenuity, and self-sacrifice for higher ideals. When we look at old newsreel footage of jerky black and white figures running across no man's land, we should see not distant ancestors, but ourselves. For human nature has changed far less in these 100+ years than the technologies he holds in his hands. And the fog of uncertainty that concealed the future from soldiers on that March morning still surrounds us, forcing us to peer into the horizon with hope and anxiety.